Yeah, good morning or good evening, good night, depending on where you are in the world. Um, and thanks, Mary, for inviting us to do this, to share our thinking about the subject. If you missed part one, or if you don't remember what we said there, I want to very quickly repeat or give a summary. Uh, we know about the devastating consequences of unethical behaviors, and we cited Volkswagen and Boeing as examples last time. But we also said that a lot of unethical consequences remain unpublished, and very often even companies don't even know about it. The unethical conduct is basically rooted in people's behaviors much more than processes. And if you a lean process, just throwing out the process itself without the right people part of it can create more temptations. And we talked about empowerment there that could even cause more temptations for unethical behavior. But then we also said that in a true lean culture, the likelihood for unethical behavior can be greatly minimized. And that's actually the part that we're going to talk today about what principles help there and how they can be implemented. And thanks for feedback. We got some feedback after the first session. Carsten Hartung from Germany, he pointed out that education and personal integrity also play a great part in lean behaviors. Of course, Carsten, no doubt about that. And certainly different people in a company take a different approach to ethical conduct. And then Steve Olmers and some data that I will use later on in this presentation. So in the first, we ended the first part with 5 inspirations that we think will help us to find our way to a lean, people-focused culture that also takes the right approach to ethical behaviors. And with that, I will turn it over to Jean-Claude for the first subject here, the people-focused lean.
Okay, thank you, Norbert. Yes, people focus, that's really very important, but I must admit that from my personal experience and career, that the people side, let alone the people focus, that was not something that came very naturally to me. Being an engineer by background, I had a tendency always to see the problems through a technical lens, exclusively a technical lens. And while there is nothing wrong looking at a problem through the technical dimension, the people side, I realized that the people side was really more important. And as I learned it personally, I tried to share my learning with the organization. And I said, whenever we had a major problem, I said, well, our products, they don't design themselves and they do not manufacture themselves. At the end, if there is a problem, there is always a human root cause. And that is not meant to blame people, not at all. And I will come back to that later. It is just to recognize how important people are if we want things to go well. And that means that we really have to, in the people aspect, we have to earn and build trust and between the leaders and the organization. And we have to nurture that trust by developing an atmosphere of responsibility and accountability. And that is what I already mentioned a bit earlier. It's not so much reliant on the consequences of bad behavior, but it's to make sure that people know that they are responsible for it. The other thing that is also important is that the accountability is based on a covenant between the leaders and the associates. And this covenant or agreement includes, first of all, that deliverables are chosen or defined so that associates know how they can deliver it. It is not impossible goals that lead people to choose ways that are maybe not okay to deliver those. And then also how the deliverables are accomplished. I think it's very important that there is an agreement on that. And I must say that leaders have to stress that things have to be done the right way. And I was very fortunate in my career that I had leaders who always insisted on that it is not just about achieving the objective, but it has to be done the right way. The other thing is emphasize the collaboration among people and versus just competition, or I would say an unhealthy competition. And then finally, the last point that is to encourage diversity. A team without diversity lends itself more to something that is, I would say, there are no natural checks and balances, whereas if you have diversity, people with different backgrounds, that sets up the natural checks and balances, and that make unethical behavior maybe not completely impossible, but much more difficult. So if you can go to the next chart.
Yeah, it's up. Yeah.
Okay, good. So the leadership model, I think the humble leader sets an example. That is really something I would like to elaborate. If there are problems in many cases that are published that we know about, you can trace them back to an egocentric leader. Humble leaders rarely set an example of greed and personal ambitions or power plays. But they care and they help associates, and they set the example. And setting the example is really the important thing here. It's setting a clear example and an unambiguous example. And I give you here an example from my career where I maybe failed to set a clear example. And that was that I was vacationing with my family, and one of my direct reports called me about the problem. And he told me that what the decision that he was expecting from me. And finally, I agreed with him because, I mean, it was a long call and my family was waiting on me. We were on vacation, etc. But I realized it was not a great decision, but I still thought it is something that can be defended. Now, a few days later, when my vacation was over and I had time to think about it, and then I also had time to talk with other people, I realized that I had made a mistake, and I was wondering how I could have made such a decision. And I just decided that I made a wrong decision, and I changed my decision. And luckily I did that. Because what I did was not really an unethical decision, but it lent maybe to an interpretation because it was in the gray area. And that is something that the leader has to avoid. And that is also why it's important to be able to correct your decision. If you believe your decision was not the best, don't hesitate to correct it. Now, respectful oversight. I think it's based on trust and respect. We have to presume that the vast majority of associates, but not just associates, people in general, that includes customers, they want to do the right thing. And that is why auditing and inspecting, they are needed. I had a board member once who said, you don't get what you expect, you get what you inspect. But I think it should be kept to a minimum. And I give you an example here. That is the self-scan that is used now in many stores. I mean, you scan your own whatever you buy before putting it into your cart. You scan it, and then when you come to the checkout, you just use the scanner, and you pay, and you can leave. But occasionally they make a spot check to see, I mean, that you have really scanned everything. But that is just occasionally. It's one, I don't know what it is. I have the feeling for me it's 1 out of 10. And that is much more efficient than putting all the things into your card. Then you go to the cash register. Everything has to be taken out of the card, has to be scanned by the cashier, and then it has to be put into plastic bags and cards. So a much more efficient way that partially relies on the trust of the people. The other approach that I have found in my career that works very well, that is separation of powers. What do I mean by that? That is the associates who do the job are not the same as those who collect the data. And I will give you 2 examples that I have seen in my career, and that I believe that worked really very well. If you have to release a new product and you ask the team leader or the project manager to present the results, well, naturally, they will be tempted to present the results in a favorable way. Maybe emphasize a little bit more what is positive, and de-emphasize maybe things that are not so good. It's just human nature. There is nothing that can be done again. That is human nature. However, what I found worked very, very well is when it was the test organization, so the organization that was responsible for running all the tests, when they were in charge of presenting the results. They were much more objective than the team that developed the new product. And I have seen, by having them present the result, you have that separation of power, and it worked. You get a much more objective way of presenting the results of a new product. And I think that the release committee or the release team that eventually gives the green light to a new product, they can have much more confidence that what they have seen reflects really reality. Another example that I found also worked very well, that is for cost reduction teams. I mean, if it is the team that does the cost reduction and implements and develops them, etc., also calculates how much money was saved, there is also there a confusion of the responsibilities. And I have seen that in that case, if it is the finance organization that calculates the savings, discussing and reviewing that with a team that implements the cost savings, that gives you a much more objective way of assessing what really has been done. And it's not just, I mean, for the organization itself that it is better, it is also for the team that finally has developed either the new products or the cost reductions, because they can be much more confident that what has been shown corresponds to reality. So with that, I turn it back over to you, Norbert.
Thank you, Jean-Claude. I want to cover the last 2 items here. The first one, what we call ethics end-on. We all know the end-on in the Toyota system. It's where everybody working on an assembly line is empowered to stop the assembly line if they see anything that is not perfect. And the question is, could we engage the people in a similar way to pull an ethics end on to just kind of stop that behavior. And of course, we all know the anonymous lines that companies have to report abuse or things like that. Could something like that be used? And I got some good feedback there from Steve, who said that the 43% fraud in a company is actually reported internally. So it seems like something like that could work. But then you have to ask yourself, would people turn in their colleagues and embarrass them? And that's where I'm not so sure that would work so well. But I think I can envision a system where people should empowered to coach their colleagues at all levels, maybe even coach upwards when they see the behavior that is not totally appropriate, because most associates know that any unethical behavior can not only hurt the company, but it can only also hurt the people who work in the company. And if people feel surrounded by colleagues who make them aware of unethical behaviors, they quickly realize that the majority of the people desire the right behavior, and I think something like that could work. But I also believe that appropriate help and coaching, education, and so on is needed, and maybe even in some cases an appropriate escalation may still be required there. Then the last subject is to trust the process, but I want to emphasize that it is trust the right process and the right system. You heard this before, the right process generate the right results. Yes, to a large extent that's correct, but I still believe that the right process has to also be supported by the right behaviors of everybody who works in that process. And let me give you an example here, an example that I lived through myself. You know the traditional system for appraising people, for advancing people in a company based on force distribution. It's where everybody is put in a rank order, and then that's what leaders are working with. And I used to manage teams like that, and it's very obvious that the team members, first of all, they have an agenda of their own, promoting themselves, and then they have an agenda promoting their function, because their function is really the one that is responsible to put them in that hierarchy, in that ranking. And I actually remember a class on project management where we were taught that you have to put everything on a common denominator. And actually, it was emphasized that you have to come up with a solution that everybody can live with. And that solution, I found very often, is not the solution that creates the best value for the customer. So contrast that with a different approach where people are on a team, and the only goal of that team is to generate the best value for the customer, and people actually collaborate, and they are encouraged to do that, and they actually organizationally encouraged to do that. And I saw that approach lead to a culture where people help each other. And now we are talking about really where you can, the results of a team that works in such a manner is so much better than the results of a team where everybody works against each other. And also the collaborative, helpful behavior here leaves very, very little opportunities for any unethical behaviors, because people help each other. They also watch each other, and they influence each other on teams like that. Then standard work can really help with ethical guidelines, because standard work, remember, is not written by the authorities in the company. Standard work is written by the people who do the work. And I think if people who do the work have the right, in the right culture, with the right approach and with the right ethics behaviors, will write those standards. So the standards will work the way they are intended. They're intended by the team. So that's those are the 5 points that Jean-Claude and I felt can give the right inspiration for what we call the right approach, the right culture to encourage people to behave in an ethical manner, whether the consequences will be published at the public at the end or not doesn't really matter. But I think this kind of thinking can help companies tremendously for better results in terms of financial results, or just by building a much better culture. So unethical behaviors, as we said, has consequences and is rooted in the behaviors. Lean process focus alone could create more temptation, but a good lean culture can facilitate ethical behaviors. And we've given you a few examples here, a few principles, and a few examples that you may find useful to help you create that culture. So with that, I think we have time for a few questions and comments.
Thank you so much. Just as a reminder, if you have a question, please go ahead and use the Q&A feature instead of the chat feature. Norbert, there is a question there. Do you see it, or would you like me to read it to you?
No, please read it.
Okay. They ask, it's anonymous. It says, with so many KPIs and bonus based on them, how do you fight the system to do the right thing rather than meet the KPIs?
Jean-Claude, you want to take the first shot at that?
No, sorry, I didn't see the question and I did not understand it. If you could maybe repeat it. Sorry about that.
Sure, that's fine. They ask, with so many KPIs and bonuses based on them, how do you fight the system to do the right thing rather than meet the KPIs?
Yeah, I think there is a fundamental distinction here between, I mean, who it is, but is it the leader or is it the associates? I think the associates, I mean, it is very difficult to change that just on their own. I think this is really the accountability and responsibility of the leadership. They have to make sure that things are done the right way. And even though there are many KPIs, as I said before, leaders have to insist that things have to be done the right way, meaning in an ethical way. So that is really the accountability of the leadership.
Thank you. That is the only question that I see. We can wait for just a minute to see if there's any other questions.
Well, while we wait for the question, let me just add one comment to the previous question. You get what you measure, and I have seen very few companies that even have KPIs that help them with the people part of their culture. And I think it is companies should think about that. And I'm not trying to emphasize negative behavior here with KPIs, of course, but you have leading indicators that show you that your culture is moving in the right direction. And I would encourage more companies to think about using some more of the people-related KPIs rather than only results and process-related KPIs.
Thank you. And Peter asks, do you need to have a strong foundation on core values to find the non-ethical activities?
Jean-Claude, you want to start?
Well, yes, I would agree. You have to have a strong ethical foundation. I think that is, people have to be very clear in their minds that things have to be done in an ethical way. Otherwise, the company is not doing it. And I believe in companies where things went wrong, we all know examples, that was not clear in the minds of the people. And why? Because it was not expressed that way by the leaders, and in particular at the very top.
Yeah, I agree. And I have seen people, leaders, just talk about these core values. And if the core values are just talked about by the leaders, they are not having much impact. They have to be lived by the leadership. People have to see evidence that that the leaders also follow these core values, and that is something where I saw a lot of mixed messages coming through. That there are values that are talked about, but people follow what they see, not what they hear.
Thank you. Sarah asks, any ideas on how to align all internal systems like employee ranking to a lean ethics framework? She says, seems like there's something missing and undermines everything. So.
Well, let me start that off. I was actually expecting a question like this. Yes, there are ways to do it. They are not straightforward. And I don't know why, but it seems like the HR organizations are always a little bit, in most companies, a little bit slower embracing this lean thinking and this lean culture, even though somebody has to drive that people part of that culture. And maybe it's just because the traditional systems are so much simpler. But just to give you two little hints here how that could be improved, to engage a much larger group of people in this process, in this evaluation process, is one thing. And then also the criteria. For example, I have seen in companies where associates can choose who would I prefer as a leader, and team members on project teams are allowed to choose who would I like to work with me on this team, and leaders are allowed to choose who would I want to work for me, and a larger sample of that. Those are different questions than companies have asked traditionally, and I have seen this work quite well. But you have to have a much larger sample size. But I think that would give people a much better input on who are the really better performers in the company than the traditional forced distribution. Jean-Claude, you want to add something to that?
Yeah, maybe. I think I fully agree with what you are saying. I would just add, it's also very important that a company does not promote people that have achieved their goals in an unclear way. Let's put it that way. Not necessarily unethical, but where the organization has some doubts, because that's a horrible example. And I have seen that in the early stages of my career, and it was not very good. When people are promoted, people have to believe, well, that is because she or he has done it the right way. So that is, again, a responsibility of the leadership. Make sure that the people who are promoted have done it the right way and are seen that way by the organization,
Okay, thank you. We have another question, last question. This is from Barry, and he asks, do you have examples of key behavioral indicators that measure ethical behaviors for associates, managers, and leaders?
Jean-Claude, you want to take a crack at that? Let me think about it a little more.
Well, indicators, I don't know. I couldn't find. This is more a matter of judgment, I believe, where the superiors have to make a judgment. Have these people, or has that person done it in an ethical way? Has it been achieved in an ethical way? Is this behavior ethical, etc., versus a KPI? I'm a little, I mean, that's my personal opinion. Not everything can be reduced to a KPI. There have to be judgment calls in life and also in companies to see whether things have been done the right way. And that cannot always be captured, in my mind at least, by a KPI.
Yeah, I agree with that. And in fact, Jean-Claude, it reminds me when we started Gemba Walks, and it was amazing. Jean-Claude actually started Gemba Walks at Goodyear, and it was amazing what he learned in these Gemba Walks. I was fortunate to walk with him, at least at the beginning, to get these things going. And it was amazing to me what could be learned there by asking the right questions and by and respectfully asking the right questions. You didn't have to probe anything, or it wasn't a witch hunt or anything. It was just people tell you what they think. If there's an environment of trust, you find out things that are very valuable, and that kind of supports what Jean-Claude just said. It wasn't a dashboard; it was just asking the right questions in the right circumstances that that provided that information.
Yeah, maybe just quickly to add to that, Norbert. Listening, but also delivering. Again, Gemba Walks are also a very good opportunity to deliver some key messages. Again, tell the people, make sure you do it the right way. I know that this is very challenging, but do it in an ethical way, do it the right way.
Perfect. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for your time today. I know we did not get a chance to answer all the questions. I will go ahead and forward those to the presenters along with your contact information. And please, if anybody has any other feedback or they have more questions and would like to engage the presenters more, I can share their information with you in an email as well. So
yeah, I'd appreciate it, Mary. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you everyone for joining. I hope you enjoyed the session today, and we hope to see you again next month for our next webinar. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night. Goodbye.